pianists, teachers, colleagues, and friends. Today we're talking about how to teach the Beethoven Sonatina in G major, the first movement, which is marked Moderato. It sounds like this. If we haven't met before, my name is Jana Williamson and welcome to my home piano studio in the suburbs of Chicago. Just a quick note, I am going to feature the second movement of this sonatina next week, so make sure you're subscribed to the channel and be on the lookout for that. So the main feature of this piece is obviously that it's an easy work by a great master composer. It's one of the easiest things that Beethoven wrote, and for that reason I think this is a wonderful transitional piece for a student out of the beginner or elementary level into their intermediate study. And you can really sell this piece as, hey, look, you're playing a piece by one of the most famous, greatest composers of all time. This might be a student's first sonatina that they play. I do think there are a few other sonatinas that are easier. If you click right up there in the corner of this video, you'll find a link to another sonatina that I do think is easier than this one, but which shares a lot of the same features and learning objectives for your student. Because, as I said, this is by a famous composer and it's a great piece for bridging that gap between beginning method and intermediate study, this piece does show up in a lot of student books and it is featured on my Method to Masterworks resource. I'd encourage you to click the link in the description to check that out. That is a spreadsheet and video which helps you bridge the gap between elementary level or beginning study and intermediate study. To my knowledge, this is only on one method that I feature in that spreadsheet, and that's the Alfred Premier Performance Book 6, which really at that point, that level is, early intermediate and moving you into intermediate study. But this does show up on quite a few intermediate repertoire series as well. I am looking at it today in the Festival Collection Book 3, which is a great starting intermediate book. Frequently, if I use a beginner method like Piano Adventures or Piano Safari through to its end, this might be the first book then that I give a student that is entirely a collection of historical repertoire. So again, check out Method to Masterworks, and I hope you will check out the editions that I've linked in the description of this video as well. This piece is in G major. It's easily sectioned off and easily obvious what chords and G major scale patterns we're using, and there are so many wonderful things that we can highlight for our students. I do want to start with one of the difficult things in this piece, and that is the grace notes, and then we'll come back to some of the other main features. They are grace notes. They are these teeny weeny little notes with the slash through them. At this time period in the late classical, which is this time period for Beethoven, of course he moves us into the Romantic era, but this would be considered classical for sure. We frequently play those kinds of notes as appoggiaturas on the beat. And in this edition that I am looking at, Helen Marley has marked them with a tiny little dotted line to show that they should be played on the beat in sync with the left-hand note that lies on that beat. So for instance, measure 1, she's advocating for that right hand B grace note to be played with the left hand fifth, or diminished fifth, which would sound like this. Almost turning into 16th notes. I think that is a completely viable way to do this. I hear this frequently played just as grace notes, just barely before the beat, or as a very, very short note, kind of in or right anticipating that beat. And I think that is a fine way to play this as well. In other editions, you will see it marked that way. And Diane Heidi even has a recording of this for the Chose Beethoven Selected Works, which I will link in the description as well. You can find that recording on Spotify. And she plays it as a grace note just ever so slightly before the beat. I wanted to highlight these at the beginning because grace notes and appoggiaturas and all other ornaments can be a massive stumbling block for our students because they see this extra note. It kind of ruins the rhythmic flow in their brains, and students at this level probably haven't seen a lot of them. So what I always do with especially lower level students is ask them to take the grace note out first and just hear all the principal notes. And that that just allows them to know the general outline. The grace notes are simply a decoration or an ornament, and they should not be something that you trip over that causes you a lot of technical, strife. So to that end, once your student has that outline very well established, being able to play both hands, then you can just think that they just sneak in right before, that you roll from the right to the left to play the BA. The other way you can get them to start doing these is to actually play it as a harmonic second together, which our ears can barely discern the difference between that and an actual grace note played before the beat. So those are all ideas. When you are having your student sight read this, or when they're reading it for the first time in your lesson, then I would just show them the grace notes and say, look, let's not trip over those. Think that you're just playing the principal note. You can even just have them ignore them altogether the first time that they read. It does become, as I said, a stumbling block, and one that we don't want to become a major problem. We want them to be able to play this rhythmically right in time, and if we don't address those, it will affect your students' rhythm and their technique. Okay, so let's go back to basics of this. We're in G major. Your student at this point should already know G major scales. I would advocate for them having a technical routine of 2 octave scales at this point, some sort of chord progression, whatever your favorite chord progression is, basic broken triads, and block triads, and then at least 1 octave arpeggios, if not 2 octave arpeggios at this point, because all of those things show up in this piece. We have basic left-hand chords, such as the downbeat of measure 5 is the G major chord, the downbeat of measure 6 is that C major chord in second inversion, the 4 chord. But then we do have some other more interesting things, and I think one of the things you can use this piece as would be an introduction to 7th chords. If we jump all the way over to measure 25 to the coda section, we have a D7 chord, followed by G second inversion, followed by D major triad. And so you can talk about the difference between a D major triad and a D7, and how even though that D7 doesn't have the F sharp, it is still obviously a D7 chord. And having your student block through all of these chords, regardless of which section you're in, is going to help them understand what chords are going on, as well as navigate the movement that their hand will do, to feel the shape of those chords. We don't want to get locked in any kind of, claw hand shape, but we do want to really understand how those chords feel in the hand, and then be able to transfer that to the next sonatina that they learn, or other piece with Alberti bass or broken chord figures. So if I take the coda and just block through that 1 time per chord, it would sound like this. And depending on how much of the piece I'm assigning in the first week, whatever chord patterns we have, we would definitely identify them and block through them. And that would be their first assignment, would be to do the left hand like that. When you look at measure 9, we don't have Alberti bass or straight up, up and down broken chords. We just have these intervals, a third followed by a fourth, and then fourth, fifth, what would be a 6 but doesn't have the D on the bottom, and then those same intervals show up in measure 13 and 14. So even just circling those, circle the first third, circle the first fourth, and block through those. That's so much more efficient in the learning process than reading, 8 eighth notes per measure. And it's going to speed up your students' learning, but it's also going to help them hear what's going on. That top note in the left hand, this is higher level than what an early intermediate student would know, but the top note creates this beautiful counterpoint with the right hand. If they can kind of hear that that's what's happening, even on a subconscious level, that's going to help them shape that more beautifully, as well as remember what's happening. Let's talk about fingering, which is directly tied to articulation. At the very beginning, the left hand is marked with a slur, and I love that Marley has put in here 2-4, so that then you can play 1-5, back to 2-4 and actually play that legato. Most students, when they see that G major third on the bottom, are going to slap down a G position, put their 5 on G. So have them observe that, and then make sure wherever they're starting that left hand, when it's supposed to be legato, that they do start in a place that allows them to play legato. The same is true of the right hand, and I do want to highlight that there are several G major scale patterns in this that do not begin on G. And so if a student is looking at measure 10, they might think, oh, that's an A scale, or they might not think it's a scale at all. These are all G major scales that are beginning on different notes. So measure 10 begins on A, measure 12 begins on B, again A and 13, they don't use the same fingering that you would use if you were encountering that in a regular G major 2-octave scale, but our students need to know that's still G major. It still just has all white notes with the F sharp. It's the G major tonality. There's no accidentals, and just because it doesn't start on G doesn't mean it isn't a G major scale. So if you're working on scales with your students, highlighting that and understanding, stating the obvious that these are G major scale patterns will open their eyes, again, allow them more understanding and knowledge of this piece. The right hand also has 2-note slurs. They show up right away in measure 2. Now these 2-note slurs are easy because you repeat the second note for the next slur, so you automatically have to lift, and it automatically gets that lovely down, up, down, up, down, up. That does not occur in measure 8, where you have a 2-note slur, down, up. And that A is dissonant against the left hand G. So it has that feel of an appoggiatura, and it's so terribly satisfying when it resolves to the G on beat 3. Sometimes students will turn up their noses at that dissonance, and you have to say, play the whole measure, make sure you hear how it resolves, and then it's just so juicy and delightful. As I said, this piece even includes broken chords or arpeggiated figures. The right hand has this 4-note arpeggiated chord in measure 26. So students need to understand that's just a G major chord in kind of an arpeggio type figure. Get the arm aligned behind the hand to get up to that high D. And then left hand at the very end, same thing. It goes down that arpeggio, and same thing, you want the arm aligned behind the hand with good fingering that's going to allow them to, get down there without any kind of weird spider hand or crossover. So as you can see, I've already gone over many theoretical and technical concepts that are in this piece. I think this presents as relatively easy, but it does have enough things that are difficult, all happening at once within one forward moving moderato tempo, which should be felt in 4, not in the 8th note. We should be feeling 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, as opposed to, that will ruin this piece and make it feel very pedantic. So it does need to be moving along in 4/4 with beautiful phrases and with the dynamics that are indicated in the score. So if you have trouble evaluating the difficulty of any particular piece like this one, I would love for you to check out my repertoire difficulty worksheet, which again you can see right in the description of this video. Take caution when assigning this piece, because anything written by the great masters such as Beethoven or Mozart tends to actually be a little more difficult to play truly artistically, to truly master it. And while this piece only seems to have half notes, quarter notes, and 8th notes in G major, there is a lot going on, and to play it artistically requires a lot of care, diligence, practice, and finesse. All right, I hope that gives you a few ideas on teaching this lovely sonatina. Don't forget, I am going to address the second movement next week, so make sure you are subscribed. Hit the like button and share this video with a colleague or friend if you found it helpful. Thanks so much. Best wishes in your teaching and playing.